Welcome to the Youth Sport Podcast. My name is Rihanna Poskin, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly within youth sport. It feels great when a kid comes up to you and says, "Coach, because of you, my life changed in the best way." It would feel awful to hear that because of you, the coach, a kid doesn't want to have anything to do with it ever again. I believe that kids deserve to have fun, to learn, to grow, to compete, and to play in a great environment. Join me as I interview guests that spill the tea on youth sport in order to help you make an enormous impact with kids right now. This episode of the Youth Sport Podcast is brought to you by Lululemon. I am part of the Lululemon Collective and will receive commissions when you shop through my link. Buying something for you or your loved ones, like my favorite warm down joggers, helps me to continue to bring interesting and empowering conversations for everyone. I have to tell you, when I'm coaching, I want to make sure that I'm dressed appropriately, I'm comfortable, my clothes stand up to all kinds of random situations, and that I have pockets. You never know who's going to ask you to hold something for them or what random things you need to carry with you. The Lululemon warm down joggers take care of all of my needs. I invite you to find your go-to item by browsing through the entire Lululemon site. You won't be disappointed. Please use the link provided in the video description below to start shopping. Welcome back to another episode of the Youth Sport Podcast. I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Desiree Markovich. Desiree started playing soccer at the age of 5 and continued to play until she was 23. But within that time, within 1 year of playing soccer in college, she found rugby, and she hasn't stopped playing ever since. She played for the Pittsburgh Angels, Midwest Rugby Union, and then moved to Minnesota to play for the Minnesota Valkyries and Twin City Amazons. Within her 8 years in Minnesota, she was also in the USA Rugby pool and was selected for the national team. She has 3 caps, which is an honor in rugby, representing an appearance for a national team. Injuries down the road prevented her to continue to play at that level. She moved back to her home state of Pennsylvania in 2014, which is when she started her coaching career. She is a current coach in high school and with women's rugby. Welcome to the podcast, Des. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I just wanted to let you know that I still have a lot of fond memories of piling as many soccer players as possible onto an inflatable hot dog. And,
oh, yes.
and I still have pictures from it. So hopefully I can dig those up and share those with people. And I really loved it that even though our time was short together, we had a blast when we were together. And you came all the way up to Canada to my parents' cottage one summer.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we had some good times, and then our life went into separate directions. So soccer continued with me, and then rugby continued with you. And so I'm so pumped to hear about more of what happened to you when our lives went in different directions. And I would love to start with your youth experience. What kind of a kid were you?
I was a very active kid. Like you said, I started playing soccer when I was 5, and I got into that because my cousin, who was a few years older than me, was always playing in the yard. So I'd always play around with him. And as soon as I was able to get on that first kids league team, my parents signed me up since then. And I don't think I ever dropped it since until I was, I don't know, I want to say maybe 21, 22 is probably the last time I actually played on a soccer team.
And you have fond memories of just being super active and being on teams?
Yeah, between soccer was my main sport growing up, but then as I got into my teens, I also got involved with a lot of softball as well.
Okay.
So I did softball from, playing in the local township team until I played varsity softball and soccer in high school as well. So I was very active through most of all my life and still am.
Still am, yeah. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about rugby, and then we're also going to talk about overcoming adversity through sport, and then also the opportunity for women in rugby. And so these are going to be cool things that hopefully we can really help other people understand what's going on in women's rugby. And then also in general, for the general listener, no matter what sport you come from, trying to figure out how we can tap into kids if there's something going on with them where we can make an impact with them. So you've got a lot of insight into that. So I'm pumped to share some of that. Now, you didn't find rugby until you were in university. And we only had, so let's share, we went to the same university. That's how we met. And we didn't have like an official rugby team. It was a club, was it not?
Correct. It was a club.
Yeah. So how did you find it? How did you get into it?
Well, since we were on the same soccer team, our assistant coach, Miss Abs, actually played on the club's rugby team as well. And to be fair, she literally dragged me to practice. When I'm not saying like she just said, hey, let's show up. She literally showed up my dorm, grabbed my cleats and put me in the car. And
really?
Yep. And made me go to practice. Not going to lie, I hated it at first.
Okay.
But I just, it was very, very different to me. And it was a sport that I didn't understand.
Yeah. I don't think most people do.
No. And I was just like, I don't get it. I didn't get the rules. And the only thing they said, hey, here, Des, here's a ball, just go run forward. I said, oh, okay, no problem. But failed to mention all the other stuff that happened after you run forward, get hit, lay on the ground, and everything else that happens after that.
Yeah.
But so I did play a few games with Cal U as their club team. My first official game on rugby was Cal U versus WVU.
Okay.
At the time, one of my good friends from high school played for, so we found out we were playing against each other for the first time. And I'll never forget this. It was the first game both our parents were at, and they're standing on the sideline. And I remember getting the ball and running down the sideline, and Kim, which was her name, she clotheslined me right in front of our parents. And my mom, I remember my mom saying to me after the game, "You sure you want to play this sport?" I'm like, I don't know, but so I played, I guess I was only at Cal U for a year. So I played like 1 or 2 semesters with them. And then when I moved back to Pittsburgh, Abs again, who was playing at the times for the women's Pittsburgh team, came to my house and picked me up and drove me to a rugby tournament, which I did not want to go to at all. But I ended up going, and then I kind of started feeling the love about it and the community of rugby and all that it was out there, of all these tournaments and fun things you can do with it. And I was like, okay, this is not bad. I can do this, and kind of stuck with it ever since, and kept developing and growing, and realized the potential with the sport at this point.
I have a funny Ab story as well. I guess she has a history of doing this, of just randomly picking people up, because I was a freshman walking down to class, and I think it was her and Marcy, who was another one of our assistant coaches. They pull up in this car and they're like, get in. And I'm like, what?
Like, where are we going?
I have to go to class. And here I am, I'm like, I got to do well in school. I can't lose my scholarship. I'm not going to be like ditching anything. What's coach going to say if I don't go to class? And so they're like, just get in. So I was like, okay, if my coaches are telling me to get in the car, I'm getting in the car. And they took me to this hot dog place in the middle of like a town that I had never been to before, because I was new in the area. And we just ate hot dogs and had a blast. And then they came back, dropped me off at my dorm, and that was it. And I was like, that was the best afternoon ever.
Yeah, I feel like that's what she's good for, is like, get in the car, we're going. I'm like, where are we going? I don't know, just get in. I'm like, okay. You didn't ask questions, you just got in the car.
Yeah, I think you need people in your life like that, because I feel like I'm more like, I'll follow the rules, I'll make sure I do everything, and every once in a while, so long as it's not like super big trouble, someone can come in and kind of shake your world up a little bit, and it can be a really good thing. It can be adventure.
Yep. To this day, I still, everything that happens to me, I was like, I blame Abs. That's all I gotta say. I blame Abs.
Okay, so I was eventually going to ask you about role models. Would you say that she's a role model to you?
Yeah, she definitely helped me get to where I am today. And you know what? Even though me and Abs, she started me playing, throughout my whole career since she moved on to Atlanta, we actually played against each other a couple times.
Okay.
So, you know, she's been a great influence and a person I can always talk to and still talk to this day. I got to see her last 2 years ago for the first time, so a while. But yeah, I would say as a sports, she's definitely been someone I looked up to for rugby, and she's still involved, and she taught me a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. So you went off and then started playing in different leagues. How was that when it started to become more serious? Was the community something that you had to get used to, or like, was it a cool thing? Like,
you know what? It was tough at first, because so the way rugby works, it's changed over times, but when I was starting out, you played for your club team, and from your club team, you play for a union. In Pittsburgh, our union is the Allegheny Union, which is all the all the states, or all the teams that are in Pittsburgh, Ohio, and Detroit are all in the Allegheny Union, which is really weird how that works. Oh, I'm sorry, in Buffalo. It's really weird how that whole thing works. So you'll play within your interleague that way at the time. And then from there, you can be selected for the all-star team on your union team. And then from your union team, then you also at the time was called ITTs, which is an interterritorial tournament. And that was where we were part of the Midwest Union as well. So they had the Allegheny Union to the bigger union, which is our Midwest Union, which consists of your Midwest states. So it was, Pennsylvania, or half of Western PA, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa. I think I got them all in there. And then you had like your Northeast, and you had your South, you had your West, you had your Northeast. Like, so there was a bunch of different ones. So at that tournament, once you make that team, then you go play against each other. So it's basically all-star level to another all-star level. And at that level at the time is where you kind of got scouted at the US level. There was a lot of recruitments there. And that's where I started meeting a lot of people. So from the Allegheny Union, I made it there. And then when I went to play at the ITT tournament, I got to meet some more people, and then just started making friends. And I made quite a few friends from the Minnesota team, and they basically hounded me for almost 2 years to move out to Minnesota to come play. And at one point I just said, what the heck, just on the whim, just said, okay, I'll move.
Wow.
So yeah, but being part of those teams and trying out and like making the Midwest team, it was a different culture. Like, a lot of the girls that were on that team have been on that team for a few years. So you're the new person coming in. A lot of them were from the same area, which I was the only one at the time from Pennsylvania, or even from like Pennsylvania, Ohio area. So I didn't know anyone. So it was hard, but
Yeah.
and they didn't make it easy on you at times either, playing wise. So, and it was a different level too. Pittsburgh is a decent D2 team, but a lot of those girls played D1, which was a higher level. And so they were used to playing at that competitive for years. And I was just getting into it. So it was tough at first.
Yeah, I remember. So rugby was pretty big in my high school. We didn't have football.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of what the guys did. But all I remember is just like there was definitely, you knew who the rugby people were. Yeah. And even going to our university parties, there would just be this massive party at the end of the year that was thrown by the rugby teams. And it was just wild in the middle of some field, and there would be bonfires going on, somebody shooting the boot over on the side. And so, like, if anybody doesn't know what shooting the boot is, it is basically like pouring alcohol into a dirty, nasty, pre-worn, like just worn rugby cleat, and then having to drink out of it. And so, yeah, like, the whole scene was just wild. It was just wild, in my opinion. So did you experience any of that?
Yes, I did. I mean, a lot of singing, I think I honestly can remember only shooting the boot once, and I think I spit it right back up because it was so disgusting. But a lot of rugby songs though, and a lot of chugging happened at those times. But
so
definitely remember that.
It's an interesting sport because it's so deeply rooted in culture in other countries where maybe like for a long time it's been the root of the culture, the country, even divided up into some huge rivalries between towns. So even though you were patriotic in the place where you came from, within the country there were still these huge rivalries within. So how is the US compared to international rugby?
I don't think we even compare. International rugby is insane. Think about how in the US, the NFL is. So for football here, how that is, that's what take that and times it by 5 in international rugby. Like, it's insane. I've actually had quite a bit of opportunities to travel and watch some international games and go to some internationals. I've been to Italy and watched an Italy game. I've gone to London and I've watched them play at Twickenham there. And the culture is, it's crazy. Like, the whole town just parties. They walk down the street partying. You're at the local pub partying. That's all they talk about is their rugby out there. It's crazy. And it is very divided. Like, if you're from another town and you're supporting, they don't like you.
Yeah.
And they make it well known too.
Yeah, so you just don't wear the jersey.
Exactly. Don't say you like another team because they don't like that very much. But I don't think US is quite there yet when it comes to the rugby scene. It's gotten bigger. I don't know if you want to talk to this, but there is the men's professional league now. It's growing. It's just taking a lot more time.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I would love to know your story because you did go through some adversity while you were going through sport. What would you like to share about that? We're talking about a family incident that happened when you were quite young.
So I guess this is kind of the start for a lot of it for me. You know, leaving college, moving back to my parents' house, living with my parents. It was a little rough, but playing rugby was my outlet for a long time and just having that social connection. I had a couple really close deaths in the family. One was my best friend, who I mentioned earlier, was playing for the West Virginia team. She passed away early 2005. And then 2 weeks later, I lost my dad.
Oh my goodness.
And so like 2005 was a really, really rough year.
Yeah.
I had that. I went through a little bit depression. I mean, I was still playing rugby, but it was like my outlet of playing, taking out my anger, drinking a lot. It just made it excuses for a lot of things that probably weren't good at the time. After a year of that, that's when literally on the whim one day, I was on the phone with a couple of the girls from Minnesota, and I was like, you know what? Nothing like now is time for a change. I knew I really liked rugby and I saw where I could go with it. And talking to some coaches, they were like, you know, if you really want to train and do this, you're going to have to move. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, it was a good time to go, and I needed a positive change. Yeah. And so that's when I moved out to Minnesota. I didn't want to reflect on the negatives in my life anymore, and being at home was like just reflecting on it. So I decided to make a positive change, and rugby was a positive aspect at the time, and so I went with it.
Okay. And part of what we're talking about today is how your story could help others. And so if you could help coaches that might be working with kids that might be going through something similar, not even exactly the same, but something that's affecting them enough that they're thrown off, how would you be able to advise a coach so that they can pick up on the signs of what might be going on with their athlete, and maybe what's even appropriate to help them through that situation?
I mean, as for like coaching, and I have seen it a little bit. I haven't had to, as a coach, experience as much, but you can pick up on small things when people are having issues in life and stuff. And I think it's not necessarily addressing to them like there's something wrong, but trying to like help them find like a positive aspect of like something that's going on in the sport that day, or like trying to keep it positive, keeping them involved in something fun, trying to keep them away from something you think that's bothering them. I know for me, just from dealing with some of the coaches I've had in the past, like they've known that something was right, but they kept you busy enough to, not over busy where you forget about it, but busy enough to keep you happy and not follow down a negative path in life, and just kept you going. And you could see something that was making me happy was playing rugby. So they just kept me playing. Okay. So it's hard because not everyone's like that. But like, I feel like if you're always there and you're a mentor for someone will eventually just start reaching out to you and being like, hey, I need a little bit of help. And eventually I was like that with one of my coaches who did help me out a little bit more. He took me under their wing and carried me along.
Nice. So now you did mention something that's important. So rugby wasn't a complete distraction. You were still going through the phases of healing and moving forward, but it was a tool that helped you along.
Correct. Yes. It was a positive tool.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you did go through a little bit of depression. If anybody is in a situation where they're dealing with mental health, what were the tools that helped you along with rugby?
I had a couple good close friends at the time that were basically by my side, and I did go through some things, and they basically, I hit rock bottom at one point. The drinking was bad, the partying was bad, and the anger, like doing stupid stuff on the field, like hitting someone wrong. Right. They literally actually at one point sat me down and said, you need to stop. Okay. Or you're going to be off the team if you're going to play like that. And, so come to Jesus talk, basically. It's like, I really love playing, but I wasn't doing it right.
Okay.
And that's not what the sport's about. The sport's about having fun, playing, being part of the culture, being part of the community. It's not there to take your frustrations out on someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had to personally take a change, and the threat of losing something that I loved helped me.
Yeah. So it was strong enough for you to
Correct.
make the change so that you could make sure that you were in a good place.
Correct.
Yeah. I have heard that with rugby, that it's a different kind of a sport. So maybe calls aren't always made in a way that you're called out on bad behavior all the time. Like there's ways of hurting people that are actually legal.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
So rugby is a very physical sport.
Yeah.
And, you do hit someone. There is a proper way to hit someone. People will hit you wrong and try to get away with it. But, you can't hit someone in the head. You can't hit them above the shoulder. You're technically supposed to hit around the waist or lower, but it doesn't always happen that way. You can't lead with your elbows, which people do. There are dirty things that happen when you're on the ground. I've been kicked, raked. Raked is when basically someone takes their cleat and just rubs it down your body.
Oh God.
Whether they mean to or not, it happens. And then you get bruises over, you get kicked, dirty players will take advantage of those kind of situations. When someone's on the ground, they'll give them a cheap shot.
Yeah.
Nowadays they are able to control a lot of it a lot more, but it does happen. And so, that does happen in the sport with rugby, with the contact.
Is rugby different in that your team really has to support each other because you have to have each other's back in a different kind of a way than other sports?
Yes and no. And I think it's the physicality of kind of going back to I was having a bad day, so I take it out on someone in the field. You don't want your teammates doing that to the other teams, because that not only reflects you, it actually reflects your team.
Yeah.
And so, talking to some people, it's like, hey, if you're going to keep doing that, you're going to be off the field. We don't need, whether you're our best player or not, we'll win or lose this game with or without you, but you don't do that to someone else on the field. Rugby has a high respect for players and your opponents. It's one of the few sports, you take someone out, but you'll go sit there, slap them on the butt and say, hey, good job, and go have a beer with them afterwards.
Okay.
And not playing soccer. Yeah, you'll say I'm sorry and walk away, but that's the end of it. You may not go sit and talk to them. The rugby, there's not that. It's a respect issue at that point, and be like, hey man, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, I hit you that way. And it's no big deal. It happens. So there is that respect issue that's different than most sports.
Nice. And as you started becoming more recognized, eventually you were put into the USA pool. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it was a lot of work. This was probably right after I moved to Minnesota. I got invited to my first US camp, which was a big eye opener. So it was the first camp of the season. So roughly there was probably over 100 players there, women there trying out for this team. And so it's very intimidating, and you go there and they're not going to hold your hand. So either you can do it or you can't, and people will let you know. My first few camps were pretty rough. I didn't make any teams my first year, but I was always in the pool. So I got invited to every camp every year, or every camp they offered. So, but with that, it becomes very expensive because they don't pay your way to these camps. So I would have to pay to go. And most of the camps were always out in California, somewhere warm. And then I had to pay a fee to be a part of the camp, which was, I think around the time, $300 to $400 each camp.
Okay.
So that cost adds up after a while. They'll cover you once you're there, but your expenses getting there, it got very expensive. So continue to do that. I made the development squad, which was the B side to the US team, a couple times. And then eventually I made my first tour in 2008, I believe it was. And it was our tour over in London. We did a tour over there. We played against a women's team in England a couple times. And then I believe France was there as well. And maybe Canada. There was 3 other teams.
Okay.
So I was over there for about 3 weeks, training and playing. And that was different. That was a lot. It's not only are you prepared playing wise to get over there, but it's mentally preparing yourself for that travel, training all day, lack of sleep, playing at night, playing against teams that are just as physical as you, recovering. It's more of a mental thing than a physicality thing at that point, at that level.
Okay.
But so I made my first team, got to play over there. I remember getting leveled by the girl from England, and I'll never forget that because I went high and she just totally smashed me. And I laid there for probably like 3 seconds, about 30 seconds afterwards. I was like, I don't even know where I'm at this point, but hey, welcome to international rugby, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And were you hurt after that, or was it just like a stun?
I think it was just a stun.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the team, like a lot of the girls over in the US, were just not built like they are international. Because a lot of those girls grow up playing rugby since the age of 5.
Right.
So they're training constantly and constantly, and their bodies are just, and some of them do that as their full-time job.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah.
either in the gym and training. Here, we're working, trying to train, hold down a job, go to these camps, and it's a little bit different for us over here in the US.
Yeah, well,
More play habit.
you did mention the cost of it. So not even just the cost of it, but then also maybe like if you're there for 3 weeks, what happens with your job? Like, how do you take off 3 weeks of time when you need the job and you still want to play? How does that all work?
Well, I took the easy way out and kept a bartending job so that
Okay.
I was able to. They were nice enough to let me leave and come back.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they didn't need me all the time. So some people who did have full-time jobs kind of had to work like remote a little bit. So they
Yeah.
kind of were like still checking in with work and still had to do a lot of stuff. So again, that's just another added mental thing to have while you're trying to play international rugby and you still hold on to your career at the same time.
Yeah. Did anybody give up their rugby dreams because of this situation?
Most girls that I knew, no.
No.
They found a way to make it work. And I have to say, most jobs were very supportive of it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like people got fired for going.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. But it is quite a sacrifice because
It is.
yeah, you're devoting a lot to the sport and you're not financially being compensated for it. So it's a
Correct.
big thing to make that decision to stick with it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're playing on the US rugby team. You had 3 caps. So what was it like to play for your country?
It was probably one of the best feelings. You know, to this day, even just standing on a pitch and listening to the national anthem, it still brings a tear to your eye because, you know, playing international and hearing it is just a whole nother concept. Like it really hits you like you're here representing your country in another country.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that feeling alone was great. Like I to this day, I can still remember just feeling the chills through my body and just standing there with like a smile on your face because of how far you've come. I was like, I don't even care if we win or lose this game. I just made it this far.
Yeah.
But
I really get triggered by national anthems as well. So anytime that I hear anything that hits my soul, it's pretty big. And so then for you to have to prepare, I was reading actually that there was one guy who plays and he said that he couldn't actually listen to the music because it would throw him off. And so he would, in order to stay present for what he was supposed to do on the pitch, he had to like remove himself from that emotional trigger of what the surrounding situation would have brought on him. So
yeah,
I can imagine just standing there. And what were the crowds like? Were there a good amount of people that would show up?
I mean, it was a smaller venue. There wasn't that many, and plus it was raining a lot there.
Yes, that didn't pull people out.
No, but I mean, it's obviously more people than we've had here in the
Yeah.
US. So that was a little different. I mean, there was probably at one game, maybe like 50 to 75 people but I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're only used to playing against, 10 or 15 people that are just local fans compared to that it's a little different. And playing in an actual like small stadium too. You're not just playing at a park.
Right.
So it's a big difference.
Yeah. So women's rugby has a ways to go in terms of becoming more popular for sure. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So I was running some numbers. And so you told me that women's rugby does not get paid, but there is a Premier League.
Correct.
And the men's team, they do get paid, but the average salary is about $60,000. So still not a ton. Would you say that there is a difference in terms of like the opportunity for women versus the men just based on those numbers?
There's definitely I feel like in the US an opportunity for it to be a lot bigger and more equal, I would like to say. The women's programs have always been way more successful as the men.
Okay.
But the men always seem to get the higher level because they think they're going to draw more people.
Okay.
For a fact, I mean, if you do any statistics, the women's 7th team and the men's 7 teams are about even, but the women's 15 teams is a little bit better than the men's 15 team. So I think the women's program just doesn't have the money like the men's program or the backing right now. And that's a whole nother issue with the US program as a whole. But
yeah,
I'd like to see more money going into the development of the women's program, and like still being a part of like all the email chains and stuff you see, all them, you know, hey, the women's are prepping for their tour coming up. Can you donate money? And that's all you hear is donating money towards the women's program.
Yeah.
The men's program has always had money for them available. So it's tough to hear it, but like you want to support them at the same time. But like when's enough?
Yeah. So you're not unique in this, in that professional women's teams are having to struggle. We have seen a good amount of backing for the women's NBA, which is probably, I would say, up there with tennis in terms of what the opportunity would be for women. Hockey right now is being supported by the NHL with certain players. So again, there's organizations that are trying to help them out. There's a lacrosse women's professional league that's trying to get kicked off. So there's pockets here and there all over the place. And so it must be really hard for these individual teams to be like, hey, me, help me, you know, when there's all of these sports that are, so as a group, in terms of like overall, how can we help women in general so that we can get to a point where you don't have to bartend, you know, in weird hours of the night and then take this crash course amount of time to go and play and then come back and then pick up all of these shifts and everything that you missed. Or maybe even with women that are looking to start families, you know, like how can I support my family and still be able to be a professional athlete? So it is a really big conversation, and hopefully we can keep on having it so that when we look at the young girls, the youth that we're trying to make an impact on, that they can see the trajectory of where their sport could take them. I think that's a huge thing that we need to be looking at.
And I think also too, starting, I think within the last, I want to say like 5 years or so, college level, university level, scholarships are now being offered, which is definitely helping players at least get into a good school, play a good sport. And hopefully, you know, after that, we have these top athletes coming out of college that we can have these next programs for them to go to. And, you know, a lot of girls just plateau out after college because you go back to club play after that.
Right.
And you just got done playing at this level in college, you know, traveling, they're paying for everything. And now you come out and have to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see something where they can filter out of college into a women's program, like some of the men's are doing now with their professional league that they've started the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you had to end your career because of injuries. Now, what did you end up hurting that was career ending? Or was it multiple?
It was multiple, I guess. So I blew my knee out in 2012 playing. I came back in 2013 to play, but I had ongoing issues with my knee. Yeah. So when I originally blew it out, completely snapped my ACL, MCL, and I partially tore my meniscus. So I had the surgery done, came back the following year, started playing again, and just couldn't. I had a lot of issues. I got a small infection at one point that a lot of fluid built up in my knee, kept going back to the doctor. They're like, oh, they would just scope it out, clean it out. And like, oh, just go back and play. A couple cortisone shots later, I'm just like, I just can't, like, I couldn't get, just wouldn't heal. So I finally went back to the doctor again. It's probably like my 4th or 5th visit at this time. And I said, listen, something's wrong. It kept giving out on me. I couldn't, like, I was at work one day and I was walking and I just fell over. Like the knee just completely gave out. So went back in, and then they were like, oh crap. That basically was the doctor's words to me. And I was like, what do you mean, oh crap? She goes, well, good and bad news. She goes, the ACL looks great. And I was like, oh, that's good. Bad news is you have no cartilage left in your knee. I go, where'd it go? I go, what do you mean I have no cartilage left in your knee? She's like, yeah, it just like deteriorated. You got a small infection and it literally just deteriorated away. So anyone knows about the knee, is, you have your kneecap and around there where your meniscus is all cartilage. Well, I didn't have anything, so everything on me was bone on bone.
Okay.
So that's why it was giving out, because it had nothing cushioning and it was rubbing against each other. And so at that time, I ended up having a surgery called Aci Surgery. And it was just released as a new surgery. And basically what they did is they take some good cartilage and they regrow it, and then they insert it back into your knee. So I had that done. And basically after that, they told me I would never play again.
Okay. And was it successful?
It was. I'm doing things that they said I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
I still play. I don't play as much, but I'm still able to do things. I play on a tour-sided team, so I'm able to step on a field every once or twice a year and still do some stuff. I'm very active in working out, which they said I would never be doing things I'm doing. I do have some pain, but I'm not a crippled or not being able to run or be active anymore. So
yeah,
it has helped. And so at that point, I had to hang up the competitive cleats, and I've had a couple, about 5 or 6, 7 concussions that probably should have stopped a while ago, but
yeah. And I think this is an important thing to talk about, because when we look at what the sport is, it is very physically demanding. And I would say, as a parent, we're trying to protect our kids as much as possible. And now if your kid wants to go and play a sport where it's probably not if you're going to get hurt, it's probably when you're going to get hurt. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Yeah.
So,
and you know what? You can't really prevent it either. I mean, you could get hurt walking down the steps sometimes, but rugby is, even though it is full contact, the way we teach the kids to hit, we teach them how to hit properly, to take a hit and fall with a hit, so that you're not just, you're properly doing it. So you're not just falling over and just letting your limbs fly everywhere. Right. You know how to fall to the ground where you're not going to injure yourself. You know how to hit someone where you're not going to hurt your head or hurt someone else. So
yeah,
a lot of that.
So what would you say to parents whose kid wants to play rugby in terms of them being scared of injuries? What would you suggest for them?
It's no different than your kid playing soccer or hockey or football. It's the exact same thing. You can get injured doing that, pull a muscle. Statistically, there's probably less. I don't know, actually, by fact, it'd be a good one to look up, would be concussions rugby versus football.
Yeah. And also, I was seeing that soccer, because there's no helmet, that there's obviously a lot of difference between sports just based on the equipment that you're wearing. Mm-hmm. And then the technology in helmets has drastically changed as well.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of position, what would you say is a more risky position to play?
If you're a forward in rugby, which is usually, I hate to use this term, but you're usually one of the bigger girls. But okay. I like to say it, you're the bigger, stronger girls. You're more prone to being more physicality in the game. So you're constantly doing contact. So you're at more high of a risk of hurting yourself because of the contact you're taking majority during the game. I played a back, which we're typically we're smaller, but we're the fast, shifty people. Okay. So I like to call us, we're like the running backs and wide receivers of football.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're usually the ones with balls and hands a lot. Our contact is not as much as the forwards, but our injuries could be a little bit more severe because of the way we run, and we're getting hit at a higher speed. So we're at full pace when we get hit sometimes, which at that point you could hurt yourself a little bit more.
Right.
So, I mean, it's give or take at those positions, I guess.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say one's more over another, but it just depends on what's going on.
Okay. And now for coaching, you're coaching now. So in terms of coaching courses that you're taking, what are the things that you're learning that might be interesting for the person that's listening who's getting into rugby?
From a coaching aspect, here's the first thing I learned about coaching. So being a good rugby player as a player doesn't make you a good coach.
Okay.
I remember my first season coaching. I was like, oh, this is really hard because I always knew how to do it, but then I actually had to explain it.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, just go do it. Like, just do this and this. And I'm like, oh, now I have to break the safety down of this, and this, and explain it to a way that they're going to understand how to do it correctly versus the wrong way. So what a difference. But any coach going into taking over rugby, or the first, starting to get into it, my big thing to them would be learn the safety of the movements before you learn how to teach it.
Okay. And what does that mean, the safety of the movement?
So if you're teaching someone to ruck, what's your concerns and what's the safety of what could happen if you don't do a ruck right.
Okay.
So think backwards a little bit, because most people just think you just come together and hit someone, but it's like, well, where's your head go? How low should you be? Where should your feet be? How can you stand up properly? Don't just say, hey, this is the form or the positioning you need to be in. So kind of coach it backwards of, in your head, you're like, okay, this could happen. So teach them the negative first versus what they should be doing.
Okay. And then how do you keep an athlete so that they're focusing on the good things rather than all the bad things that could happen?
As in playing wise?
Yeah. So if you are working with a young group of people and they're intimidated by getting a hit or maybe falling in the wrong kind of way, and that's what the playbook is going through their mind, how could you get them to focus on things that wouldn't put them into that negative side of thinking?
So, for example, if someone, I've had a girl who, you know, this was one of my high school kids, so they're a head case to begin with. Love them to death, but so she thought she had to do everything on her own.
Okay.
And so if things didn't go right, she was a hothead, let's put it that way.
Okay.
So literally I had to pull her aside and I was like, listen, if you do everything, what's everyone else doing on the field?
Uh-huh.
And you're getting mad because you're trying to do everything and not everyone's understanding what you're doing. I was like, is that helping the matter? She's like, well, no. I was like, well, what can you do help the matter? She's like, well, I could teach them to see things that I see. I go, okay, so how do you do that? She's like, well, I can do this and this. And I'm like, so you're answering your questions of why you're getting mad, but so you have to take a step back. You can't always do it on yourself and you can't see anything. So in order for you guys as a team to get better, you have to work to better. And how do you work to better? How do you work better? I'm like, you're a captain of this team. So take it on yourself and start helping out other people. You're the most experienced player here. You have to sit back and think about what you were like when you were in those shoes as a new player.
Yeah.
You don't know everything. You don't know where to go. But if you explain to them what you're looking for and what the end goal of this is, they sometimes will start understanding it. You can't just tell them what to do. You have to be like, hey, our goal is to try to do this. So how do we do it?
Okay.
So it's asking the hows and the whys.
Okay. And then does the ego play a big role in here?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. Again, I would think that you must be a pretty confident person to be stepping up and playing rugby. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes.
Yeah, because it's kind of different from other sports. I would say like in soccer, you can kind of hide and be a little more timid, or, like you can dish the ball off pretty quickly so that nobody tackles you, or I don't know, take other sports where maybe you don't have as much responsibility in terms of protecting each other as a group. So that teamwork and that confidence within each other must have to come through in a different kind of a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, successful rugby players they're going to be the ones who can admit to their own mistakes. They're going to be the ones who are going to put in the extra work. There's a lot of extra work of learning the game. Rugby, you watch it on TV, you think it's just mad chaos, but there's strategy behind everything we do, which people don't see. Like we run plays, we have patterns. We talk about what we do on certain parts of the field, just like you would in soccer and football. Like we run things. But like as players on the field of rugby, what's different is you have to figure it out in a split second.
Right.
Like if it's not working, we have to adjust like that. It's not that, okay, we call a timeout and can be on the sidelines. Okay, guys, what do we got to do? It's like, we have to figure it out as you go. So to be a problem solver, you have to be a team player. You have to want to work with people. You have to be vocal and not just yelling at your teammates, but vocal about, hey, I see this on the field. Let's try this. You have to be that person. So if you're quiet, rugby may not be the right sport for you just because you're a good athlete, but there's a lot more to it than just being a good athlete.
Yeah, I would say even if you are a quiet person, it might be a tool to allow you to overcome that quietness. True. So it actually could be to your benefit. Even, if something else might suit you better, but it could be a life tool that you could learn something. I wanted to ask you about studying the other team, because you're saying you have to make changes on the fly. Is it kind of like football where you would analyze typically how another team would run their own plays and then you'd have to adapt based on that? How does that work? Do you study other teams?
We do. One of the things that was part of, and I think they still do this now with the WPL, is you have to record your games.
Okay.
So that they can be broadcast, so that people can watch them. Now you do learn some things about the other team, but teams change their game plan according to the teams they're playing sometimes and what players they have.
Right.
But, one thing you do realize, you can pick up on another team within the first 10 minutes of the game of like what they're trying to do. So if they come out kicking on you right away, they're going to play a kicking game because they have speed. But if they come out crashing the ball, which I mean they're trying to run at you all the time, they're not going to kick it a lot. They're going to just try to wear you down physicality wise. So like you can kind of adapt to play a little bit different style at that point. So, but we did study other teams and try to come up with different game plans to approach and to exploit the other team's weakness before the games. And if that doesn't work, then we obviously have a backup plan. But
yeah, yeah. Now, if you could offer advice to coaches, just in general, not just in rugby, what would your main thing from learning as a player and then now as a coach be in order to help make an impact on the young people that coaches are working with?
Be a mentor, not a friend.
Okay.
And when I say that is, everyone thinks your mentor is your friend. No, your mentor is going to be someone who can act as a friend, but they're going to be the hardest on you and they're going to tell you what they think you need to hear, not necessarily what you think you should hear.
Okay.
A lot of people think their coaches are their friends and, they want to hang out with them, but sometimes you need a coach that's going to be your mentor, who's going to be the tough guy at times to help you get through life.
Yeah. And based on the way that you were as a player, what did your coaches bring out of you? And it could be either a good story or it could be a bad story. You can compare the difference. Like how would you have been as a kid responding to your coaches?
Some of the coaches I had were very tough on me.
Yeah.
Which it could have gone one or two ways. I could have simply quit the sport, or I could have pushed myself harder.
Right.
Fortunately, I pushed myself harder because, I've had a lot of coaches that didn't sugarcoat things. They're like, either you need to figure this out or you're not going to play. Hey, you need to do this better. Hey, you're doing this right, but I need you to be here. And they weren't going to be like, giving you the gold star every time you did something good. They're going to be like, yeah, you had a great game doing this, but I need you to do this next time. So
Okay.
it was always a positive with a negative. And so it honestly pushed me to be better because I wanted to be better and better to please them. And they pushed me because they knew they could push me at the same time.
Right. Now, with your injuries ending your career, do you have any regrets in terms of where you could have been with your playing?
Yeah, I do. If I could go back 10 years, I would have probably trained better and taken care of my body a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah. But then you were also going through things in life that you probably had to learn along the way of how to just cope with those things as well.
Yeah, it was not only just moving to another, state. It was my first time moving far, far away, trying to find a job, trying to afford to do something I moved there for, dealing with, still fighting, coping through, the deaths I had in my life. It was a lot, and it, it adds up. And if I could have gone back, I think I would have done things a little bit differently, but I probably wouldn't have.
Yeah. Do you think you had to go through those things to get to where you are now?
I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It made me a better person today because of it.
Yeah. And what kind of coaching philosophy do you have now? What do you want to do with the kids that you're working with?
I think my biggest focus on is the high school kids. They're for one, they're starting out. Two, they're pretty much learning a new sport. It's very small in high school out here, so not a lot of people know what it is.
Okay.
But I don't think a lot of them understand the potential of it for their kids going to college.
Okay.
Most parents are like, oh, well, they're not going to get a scholarship, and that's not true. They are getting scholarships now. One of our girls, she's a senior this year, just signed a full ride with Dartmouth.
Nice.
So she's going to get a full ride there, and they're a top 5 schools for rugby right now. So like it's out there. So it's kind of teaching them of what is out there with the sport. And if they do want to go higher, make the Olympic team, it's there.
Yeah. And the Olympics just started for women's rugby in 2016. Is that right?
Correct.
So again, we've opened up one door, another door where, they can actually have that as an opportunity, which you wouldn't have had, right?
Nope. No, I would not have.
Yeah. And how are your kids doing with the pandemic?
It's tough. There's so many stipulations, like when we do have practices, like of the mask and the social distancing. They are at high school, so we have to follow the administration levels out there of so many girls at practice. The contact, we have to limit it by, but they've also lightened up on a lot of it. And I think the kids are happier now because they're seeing each other more, because they're kind of hybrid right now. So they're not always in school. So I think that's kind of helping their mental capabilities a little bit more, is just being around people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I see them getting better.
Good.
As the season goes on. I don't know how many games we'll actually be able to play because of everything, but at least they're getting together and practicing.
Yeah.
So,
do you know anybody that's going to the Olympics this year?
I can't remember I do know a couple that are probably going to be on the team. Yes.
Okay, but it hasn't been decided yet, I guess, eh? No. Okay.
I haven't seen the finalization of it yet.
Okay, well, that'll be exciting for us to all watch, and hopefully this conversation will pique an interest in people who maybe don't know much about rugby, and you've let us know a little bit of some things that I didn't know, and so I appreciate you taking the time to educate me as well. Yeah. And just in terms of having another outlet for young women is a pretty cool thing, that if, maybe they didn't fit in with other aspects of sport or activity, that rugby could be a thing, just like you, where you were on this track with soccer for so long, and then you were dragged into going to a rugby practice, and then here you are now coaching. So it's pretty incredible.
It's been quite the journey, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the time that you've taken with me to kind of break things down and to share your story. I think it's going to be impactful for anybody that's listening. So thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed this. This was nice.
Yeah. And you know what, when you are the master of your topic, I think it's one of those things where it's like, here, hit me with questions. I got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you've learned a lot, obviously, over the years, and so you're a great person to chat with and to learn from. So thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. If anybody would like to find out when these episodes come out, you can always go to my website, which is rihannaposkin.com. And I would love to continue to make an impact on the young people that we're working with, and just see where we can go with youth sport and 99% of the kids are not going to be playing professional. So if we can make an impact with those 99% that are just going to be playing when they're young, I think we can do a great thing. So we'll see you guys on the next episode. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.